terrorism taking more roots around the world. To discuss this topic, we have learned people here with me. First of all, to introduce you, Professor Joseph Vincent Tuda Ebode. You are an expert in military and security studies. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for the invitation too.
It's our honor, Prof. We have to the end of the table that way. To my left, Yvonne B. Moma. She is a human rights activist. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.
Close to you, we have Tewi Lambif. He is an editorialist in CRTV.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Yes, the end of the table to my right is Eugene Fongwa. Eugene Fongwa is an expert in media and development. Eugene, once again, welcome to Press Hour.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and now we're going to set the ball rolling. You know, our slot that starts the program is press review. Emanuela Vemnui is right there with press review for us. Emanuela.
The press week in Cameroon was marked by lots of news events, newsy enough to catch the attention of most newspapers. Broke government goes cap in hand to donors. Again, headlines the Herald Tribune as 55 billion CFA francs more is borrowed to complete Olembe Stadium on the Median. To the Horizon, government explains 55 billion CFA francs additional funding, which has sparked misappropriation suspicions. Just when heads are likely to roll as former BIA ally pushes for probe into finances of the Olembe Sports Complex. On the Guardian Post, Cameroon Tribune assures of the 6-month deadline to complete the sports complex. Then a new start for the National Commission for Human Rights and Freedoms is announced on Cameroon Tribune with the appointment of new members. But the Horizon thinks it is a false start as government appoints mostly regime zealots, recycled civil servants, and only few women. The Median simply publishes the names of those appointed, as the Guardian Post reports that Professor Kobila hails BIA's transformation of Human Rights Commission. The crisis in the northwest and southwest regions comes afresh on newspaper columns as brave Atanganji braves Amber's care, storms fighters' dreaded fear in Mezam on the Guardian Post. Daring Atanganji bites the bullet on a kamikaze mission to Bafut Bamenda, writes the Median. The Post Weekender quotes Atanganji, only the state has monopoly of violence. To Cameroon Tribune, the Rapid Intervention Battalion reconstructs Bafut DO's office, and then Atanganji braves Amber's care to dedicate and officially receive the structure on the Horizon. Just when 4.9 million Cameroonians are facing acute food insecurity in the crisis-hit northwest and southwest on the Guardian Post, the paper further reports that more bloodshed in Mwa with the slaughtering of an 87-year-old woman. The president of the Meme Chiefs Conference then cries out, "Killings are not in our culture on the Eden." The Chronicle Times suggests communities must storm amber camps, free themselves. Community Initiatives for Sustainable Development, COMISUD, then bridges gap between civilians and security forces in a workshop in Bamenda on the Horizon. The recovery of 12 billion CFA francs fraudulently paid into the dead civil servants' account by the Treasury. The 2021 Mount Cameroon Race of Hope with 516 athletes taking part. The Cameroon-France cooperation sealed with President Biya receiving the French ambassador to Cameroon at the Unity Palace. The death of veteran agronomist politician Bernard Njongang. The deadly lions attack of civilians in the far north region, the resurgence of more contagious COVID-19, and the task and expectations of Bishop Bibi of Boya Diocese also form stories reported by the papers this week. Like always, we end our press review in a light-hearted manner with this story on the Guardian Post where a police superintendent, Didier Afana, has been slammed a 6-year jail term for collecting bribe from a native doctor. The said traditional healer Yusuf had reportedly escaped with his client's 40 million CFA francs. The original deal was for Yusuf to multiply the money by the owner of the money at the Judicial Police Headquarters in Yaoundé. Yusuf was arrested, but SP Didier Afana maneuvered and freed him because he had promised to pay him some money. They are all gnashing their teeth behind bars and expected to pay 61 million CFA francs to the owner of the 40 million francs. Until I come your way again, this is your Hour with the Press.
Thank you very much, Manuela. We look forward to having you come next week, same time. Our topic, just as a reminder, we're going to look at terrorism and human rights. Human rights, part of the solution or part of the problem on matters of terrorism. That's what we're going to be discussing today. You know, obviously, that we have so many situations in our country, in the far north, where we had Boko Haram. We know of maiming, we know of killings of all kinds and destructions. We now have in the northwest and southwest beheadings and so many other human rights abuses, terrorist activities. Today we're going to see some of the people who commit these acts. Immediately they are caught. Human rights come into play. We want to ask whether those they kill have no rights. And we have experts with us here on the set to address the issue. Beginning with Professor Joseph Vincent and Tudai Bode, who is an expert in military and security studies. Terrorism. What is terrorism?
Thank you very much for this that question. I think basically we can say that terrorism is the fact of develop terror through violence. Basically, I think that definition everybody can understand it. It means that you do not follow the formal way of expression. Then you will take a non-conventional way of express your will. And then through violence, you try to spread the terror.
Can you give us an example?
Example is
contextualize it.
You go to a market and you deposit a bomb. What do you wait behind that bomb? A lot of people will be killed. And after that, the other will be afraid to come again to that market. And by doing so, you will influence the political behavior in a kind of situation.
And we have some experts in that domain, terrorism, who say that insurgents and some other groups cannot be considered terrorists. How do you react to this?
The definition that I give emphasizes on the fact and the objectives. Now, I didn't insist on who is the actor.
Okay.
Yeah. Now you can insist on actor, or you can insist on objectives.
Okay.
For me, the fact of posing an act which has an objective to spread terror through violence is terrorism. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, the other want to understand the topic before we go around. Who decides, what are the criteria to say this group is a terrorist group, the other one is a terrorist group? Because we know that in the Middle East we have heard of terrorism in other places, and even in our country we have acts that fit in what you are talking about, but they are not following some international, those who decide. They are not termed terrorists, already grouped as terrorists. What are the criteria, and who actually decides who is a terrorist? Yes.
Is it for me?
Yes, you know, you are the expert.
Okay. I think that is that question is very complex.
Yes.
We may say that everybody has his fighter for freedom, which can be considered by the other as terrorism. Then there is not a unique way of perceiving or qualifying who is a terrorist. But what is true is that if you pass through the act and the objectives of the act, you can find a common definition. Mm-hmm. Everybody who acts like this or like that can be considered as terrorism. But you know, inside countries, you can have, let us say, a common understanding. But when you put it at the level of international relation, amongst nation, amongst state, instrumentalization of terrorism start. Then you will find that in this country, those who are considered as terrorists are not considered by another country as terrorists.
And
I think that is the situation.
And that actually is the problem we are handling today. I move over to Yvonne Bimoma. Your reactions to what he has said, we're not going to task you with defining terrorism or the criteria again. How do you react to this paradox, these double standards I want to call in classifying terrorism?
I want to bring it back to our context where we have the Boko Haram insurgency since 2014 and what is commonly called the Anglophone crisis, the crisis that is going on in our two English-speaking regions. From the onset, I think lawyers and teachers had a genuine cause. They went to the streets. 5 years running, I think that is where we start feeling that acts that are being committed, the state calls the actors, those who pose these acts, terrorists. Like he said, it's complex. We don't know how we can describe terrorism. Are the acts that are posed in our country truly backed by terrorism objectives? We should be able to answer that. I think that we had a crisis that, if it was well resolved, would not have escalated to where it is today. Well, it has not been resolved, but can still be resolved. So, to me, I think tagging people terrorists or insurgents or separatists, they have so many tags as to what is happening in our country. What I will prescribe here is, can Cameroonians sit around a table and seek for a peaceful resolution of the conflicts that are ongoing in our country?
Yes, Tewi, a reaction to the definition of terrorism and the criteria for deciding who is a terrorist and who is not a terrorist.
Well, like the learned professor said, somebody's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, and another person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. So let me use an example. When the African National Congress was fighting for the freedom of the black people in South Africa, it was outlawed. And that brings the definition of terrorism. It is the unlawful use of force or violence. If it's towards the government, it is to coerce the government to push an agenda. If it's towards an individual, it is to influence. Now, when you look at it from this perspective, it becomes difficult. But putting it within the context of what you are saying, in relation to human rights, that is where we begin to see how we can address the issue. If freedom is a fundamental human right, and if your acts affect my freedom, then we may need to look at it closely. If you have an agenda to fight for freedom, and in the course of your fighting for that freedom, you infringe in my freedom, then despite the fact that you may have a case, your objective may be clear. Let us use examples to make it very clear in our context. If the people fighting for whatever in the Northwest and Southwest, if their fight is genuine, is clear to them, and in the course of their fight, they stop me from going to school. Going to school is my right. That has affected my right as a human being.
Yes.
If it stops my freedom of movement, it has affected me. And so when rights organizations are looking at the rights of the so-called, the perpetrators of acts of violence, they should at the same time look at the victims.
Now, there is this definition by Yona Alexander of terrorism. Let me summarize. According to him, terrorists are not insurgents. They are not guerrillas. They go beyond norms, which means, from what I understand, guerrilla warfare means you don't terrorize the population. You go out for a target like military and the rest.
And
so, but that's destruction. Are you saying that also is not terrorism?
So long as it affects another person's freedom. It's, to me, is an act. Terrorism is what? Creating fear. Terrorizing, as it says. Inflicting, making sure that people are scared.
Okay.
All right? And when people are scared to act, they are being influenced by that act of violence, which means that act of violence, because there's another, you can still pass across your message without using terror.
Okay.
Without using force. And use of force here, I must emphasize that it is unlawful.
Okay, I was going to say that. Thank you very much, Eugene.
Well, I think the definitions that have been given so far are quite sweeping, in my opinion. It ignores a very important element in the construction of what terrorism constitutes and who terrorists are, which is the political construct that comes with it. Because if you just consider the act of terror, therefore you can also say that state terrorism does exist. And the schools of thought that claim that states have the authority to exercise violence.
In that light, the U.S. State Department holds that only subnational groups, not states themselves, can commit acts of terrorism.
Yes, and that's a definition, because that is a definition that is constructed by the state as a way of dealing with the rest of the non-state actors, so that the state gives itself the right to use violence as a means of resolving issues and denies everyone else that right. So it's a very contradictory construction in that it has at its base the exercise of power, which sometimes the groups that attack terrorists don't have. And that is why I think Lamif's definition underlines unauthorized use of violence.
Unlawful.
Or unlawful use of violence. The idea that you could use violence lawfully and that would not constitute terrorism in spite of the fact that you are perpetrating terror and fear and terrorizing people, to use his word again, is a very, very difficult conceptualization for me to accept. The second thing I may say is that we are seeing that terrorism and acts of terrorism are designated beyond the mere fact of creating terror and the motives. And so within the same country, some groups are terrorist groups, others are not. And we cannot deny that it doesn't exist. Within the same world, some groups are terrorist groups, some are not, in spite of the fact that they're carrying out the same activity. They have an agenda. A rebel group wants to get to power. It's using force, but it's not considered a terrorist group by one group of people. It may be considered a terrorist group by another group of people. So the political interest becomes very, very important in the definition and the designation. That I think that is the key word: the designation of a group as a terrorist group or not, which does not take into account so much the elements of action and motive.
Yes, thank you for coming in with that contribution. Prof, from what we gather, whether they are sub-regional groups, sub-national or insurgents, many people say, like we had in the Middle East, they said there has been so much injustice on them. In Cameroon, what we know, the origin of what's happening in Cameroon, the crisis, is that there has been so much social injustice, and that's what is making us get to where we are, unfortunately, today. Is injustice actually the cause of most of what we have as terrorism in the world?
Not only injustice, we may say there are many causes. You have inequality, you have religious reason, you have political reason, you have economical reason. Then what we will say is that at the structural analysis, we may say you have problem due to injustice and inequality, who will lead people to decide what to do or not to do. But between those two factors, you have other ones. Okay. Because when you want to impose to the other your way of calling God, it may not look like injustice, okay, but you want just to transform the society. Then what I may say is that every actor has his own way of conceiving the society. And through that, sometimes he negotiates, sometimes we do it by reform, sometimes he go through violence. Now, if you want a revolution, you cannot do you will not do the revolution without passing through violence. And among those acts of violence, normally we reach terror.
Okay, now, Prof, we go into what actually is the crux of our discussion today. Terrorism, are human rights part of the solution or part of the problem? The background to our discussion is that you see people come up, they maim, they kill, they behead, they destroy, using the violence, that the terrorists that we are talking about unlawfully. But immediately they are apprehended. Human rights organizations come in and say, no, we must respect the rights of those people who have been killing, who have been destroying, and the rest. So, human rights, is that part of the problem to solving the problem of terrorism, or is part of the problem? Solution or problem?
I think both. I think both. But I think when we are speaking on the respect of human rights, what you has already arrested those who have perpetrated an action. The problem is to see how they will be going to trial. Mainly when it is a state, because those who are arresting are not those who are judging. You see, even the procedure. But basically speaking, everybody, by the fact, the simple fact of killing, of taking something who is not for you, or doing something who is not allowed, that is where perpetrating abuses on human rights start. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then it may be considered as a problem at the beginning. It can be considered as a solution at the end if everybody respects human rights.
Now, Yvonne, what I want to know from you as an activist, human rights activist, is if somebody who terrorizes people were to think of the golden rule, that what I'm doing to others, I should do what I expect them to do to me. If you know that by killing you could be killed, should we now look at it? Is it part of the solution or part of the problem? Because some of these people, when they are apprehended, as we say, their rights become more important than those they have killed.
I don't think their rights become more important. If you bring it in context, I want to take an example of the Anglophone crisis. Why are civilians judged in the military courts? That's where human rights activists come in to say, why do these people not face the courts that are competent in judging them? I don't see that human rights activists will come and say, A killed and should not face the penalty for that crime committed. It is the procedure that is involved in all of that that poses a problem.
Procedure, you say it poses a problem when look at the law. Mm-hmm. When you use the rifle, the guns, you have left your right as a civilian and you are encroaching into the military section. That's where they take you to the military court, from my understanding.
I wonder if the penal code does not have articles that sanction the use of unlawful methods on others. Does it not have? And then it's a matter of who is judged and who is not judged. Is it balanced? our brothers, the uniformed officers who perpetuate same acts, judged like those who were civilians and have unlawfully or the non-state armed groups? We are talking of a matter of, can people have a level playing ground on which to function? Can we enjoy the same rights to even the crimes we commit? Why are some judged differently and others differently? We think if this is harmonized and even explained to Cameroonians, you said it's because they now unlawfully used weapons that they are facing the military tribunal.
That's what the law says.
It's the law that says that. Did they need also to be transferred from different regions of the country to come and be judged in the nation's capital? Are there no military tribunals in those regions where these acts were perpetuated? You see, it keeps raising questions.
Yeah, but this is our question. By protecting the lives of those who terrorize and kill, is it not encouraging? Is it not part of the problem instead of part of the solution? That's the question.
Yeah, it is. It's neither a problem or the solution.
It should be one of
It's the gateway.
No, it should be one of them.
Into getting out of that.
Well, okay.
I think, like David said some minutes ago, I think my rights are limited where those of some person starts. And if I'm found guilty of impeaching on those rights, I should be appropriately sanctioned for that. Human rights organizations, I don't think they stand in the gap of the law and the perpetrator, but it is that everybody should be given a fair trial and justice method. I like saying justice for all victims.
Now, talking about justice, following your words, appropriate sanctions. Should we bring back death sentence to our law? It is even back following the 2014 revision of the law of the
terrorism.
On terrorism. Yes, I think that...
Should we reactivate it and make sure that it happens? To make it deterrent?
Eugene, before you come in, I think that I want to... You are talking about terrorism, and let's talk... I want these people I hate much, rapists. If the law was dissuasive, somebody who rapes a child, castrate that person. If it's that strong, that person will not rape again.
So we should apply that in terrorism.
So we should apply that in terrorism.
If that will stop the terrorism.
But that is what we are talking about. We are so itchy to...
Yes, I've been following that conversation with a lot of interest. The first thing I think we need to underline is that we need to distinguish human rights from other rights. And human rights are those rights that are inherent in the fact that we're human beings. The right to life. First of all. Right to education, to decent treatment, and so on and so forth and so forth.
That's correct.
And that right is inherent, so it is not given to people. The state doesn't give you the right. The state only comes in to protect those rights. Human rights are not given to people. They are protected. And it is in that context that human rights organizations operate. That it doesn't mean that because I have violated some other person's rights, that you can now come as an institutional body or as an individual in authority to take away those same basic rights. Human rights, not other rights, human rights. So, and that is why there's a strong campaign against the death penalty that you just mentioned, that one of the fundamental human rights is the right to life. And because the state doesn't give you that right, they can't take it away from you, even if you have killed another person. We can find other ways of punishing people, but when it comes to fundamental human rights, they're sacred, to say the least. And it is in that context that we could say, yes, he has committed these heinous crimes, for which he's going to face the consequences. But you can't strip him naked and walk him down the road, for example. But you can't keep him in a cell and not give him food for 20 days. You can't beat him until he goes unconscious. That's the point we're not the human rights activists don't say they can't have consequences for their acts.
And exactly that is where our debate is. By treating and protecting that person the way you are saying, are you not giving injustice to the person, that particular person. Is this not injustice to the victim?
It's not injustice to the victim. Let's take a banal example. Let's say that, let's use your example of rape, that you're a victim of rape, and the punishment was that you also go rape the other person.
Of course.
Is that justice?
Bad example on pointing at me.
Sorry.
No, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay.
So you couldn't make that argument, could you? You can't. So, and increasingly we find that because your logic is based on the eye for an eye approach to justice. And we really are not in that context. We won't be talking human rights, because otherwise you have people who have been maimed because they have maimed others. You have people who have been raped because they raped others. You have people who will be killed because they killed others. You have people, just imagine that someone boggled your house and the punishment that you go boggle your own house as well. What kind of society would that be? Now, let me answer your question and sorry, I took a lot of time to get to my point.
Yeah.
The idea here is that you can't throw out the baby with the water, or the water with the baby. That if you did not protect people's rights in the most difficult situations, you won't be able to protect them when things are okay. So we say that it's sacred. Under no condition should you take away those rights, and that becomes the standard for practice.
Yes, thank you, Tewi, from what Eugene has developed elaborately. So, human rights will not help to end terrorism.
Well, there are certain things we must accept, that we just have to deal with them. We can never completely eradicate some of these actions. It's something we just have to manage. But let me quickly make a point here to say, when we're looking at terrorism and human rights, and we're looking at the treatment that is meted out to terrorists, we tended to mix issues of morals, issues of ethics, with issues of the law. The law is put in place by people, and moral values are there for all humanity. Ethical values are there for everybody. So it is, in my point of view, look for a midway of how to blend moral values, ethical values with legal issues. That is, legal matters that have a human face. The problem with terrorism and human rights is not that people who are defending terrorists are saying that they didn't do anything wrong.
So
they are simply saying that it is not because they are terrorists that they stop being human beings.
Okay.
All right? And the other issue we must note here is the complex issues. It just suffices for me to have a problem with you. Even political, it's very common in politics that anything now becomes terrorism. Look at our law on terrorism. It is so wide, so vast that it can be interpreted anyhow. If they just choose, today I see Professor, if he did something wrong to me, I just get up and say he's a terrorist.
Okay,
and then the moment they say you're a terrorist, you cease being a human being.
Okay.
Take, for example, what is linked to mob justice. Yes, somebody has stolen. Does that give you a right to make justice to kill him?
No, the law says no.
No.
The law says no.
Same, like.
Now, the producer director is telling me that there is Mr. Ejane Leonard Lulu, who is in Addis Ababa and he's following this program. He wants to contribute to the program. The producer director, if we have Mr. Ejane Leonard Lulu, who is a political scientist, right away, all the way from Addis Ababa, I'm going to ask him the question I'm asking the panelists here. Human rights. Are human rights a solution or a problem to terrorism?
Yes. Countering terrorism and respecting human rights remains one of those complex situations to deal with today in the world, and most especially when it comes to conflict. We can take from three different perspectives. The first one is that which is sustained by the former scribe of the UN, Kofi Annan, who used to hold that international human rights law provide ample mechanisms through which we should respect and observe human rights in fighting terrorism. This, he says, must be respected even in the most exceptional situations. Government that will fail to do it, they will be ceding to the objectives of terrorists. This can create hatred, this can create mistrust in situations whereby forces don't respect these human rights, and it will ease terrorists to recruit from these fertile populations through which their sympathy is found. You can take, for instance, in Cameroon, we've seen situations whereby forces are accused, and you see the outrage is that much. This is supposed to be preserved from this perspective. So respecting human rights is fundamental, and remember that human rights is a fundamental and inalienable right which must be observed by all. But when we go to an operational and tactical perspective, it's difficult, because the soldier is to deal with somebody who he does not know, is to deal with somebody who does not observe the rules governing war, and it becomes extremely complex, considering that the bullet takes no time to remove the opponent. So it is difficult, and the circumstances surrounding a conflict zone is symmetry by logic. So observing these human rights equally becomes very difficult at the operational and tactical level. But on the other hand, we can equally consider the third perspective, which we could see from the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, in which they accept certain derogations through which we can derogate human rights under some particular circumstances, most especially general interest, public interest. But now the democratic aspect of the state should play that much, and at the same time the state should be able to communicate that well with its population. So observing human rights is something which is necessary but difficult in war situations, which we need to take into consideration.
Have to take into consideration. He has joined the debate and he's going your way also here at the panel. I think before we, I just want to receive Elvis Teke, who has come into the studio with reactions from our viewers who have been following this program. Elvis, welcome. What are the reactions that we have? Take 2 or 3.
Thank you, Killian. Quite interesting reactions. Quite a good number. I've selected a few for today. We begin with Tachi Roland, who says hello to the crew. I may not be able to read all, I'll just give a summary of what he's saying. Is that terrorism, which is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. For instance, terrorism includes hijacking, kidnapping, and so on. And he says human rights have to be analyzed supra-solution and not a problem, because the fight against violence should not undermine people's right. And Kwa Akongwi Ngwa says good day to the panel, in the view that as the prevention of terrorism requires both operational and structural responses, thus the promotion and protection of human rights is also central to the effective strategy to counter terrorism. It gives some elements like one, ensuring that there's fair balance in the bill between human rights law as the center of all counter-terrorism efforts. 2, addressing in parallel the border issue of human insecurity, particularly the need to enhance dialogue and cooperation, and to take preventive measures seriously. And 3, to reinforce equality and respect. And Mary Kilachin, our regular contributor, says human rights is the best solution. Ngwachang Augustine says the slow action of human rights is more of a problem than a solution. I will conclude with Vitalis Munjang, who says human rights is the solution, and the first form of terrorism is resorted by rebels who want to seize power in a state and create a separate state by kidnapping, extortion, torture, amongst others.
Thank you very much. And just to remind you, all of you, our viewers, that if you want to contribute, just connect to CRTV Web, go to Facebook of that website. You will be part of our program, and we will read your contributions here. We've followed Mr. Ejani Leonard from Addis Ababa. We've also followed some of these reactions coming in from our viewers. Just a word now on financing terrorism. We want to see how terrorism can be stopped. Part of it is to stop the financing of terrorism. What are the ways and how can we stop them, Prof?
I think there are many ways of doing it, we cannot quote only one reason. You yourself, you quote the finance, but finance is, it means if you want, the decision of acting has already been taken. There are many reasons, as I said before. Those who are fighting for religious reason, you will not use the same way of asking him to top it than those who are fighting for political reason, economical reason, or if you want justice, for instance. Then for me, I think we
want to talk about especially financing, because if you stop that, you have stopped the source of their livelihood.
It's true. It's true that finance is the more the more efficient factor to act as terrorist. Now, if you want to stop it, you know that you have to control all the movement through bank. You know that you have to control informal economy.
What do you mean?
When we are in a situation like the one that we are living with in Cameroon, there is normally economy, what we call...
money circulates within groups, is that?
Not only. A war produce an informal business with whom people who are already living with it will not accept easily to stop activities. That is what I call
the war economy.
Yeah, the war economy.
Now we're going to go around. Eugene, how can we, briefly, we have less than 2 minutes to go. Yes, how do we stop?
I think like Prof has pointed out, cutting off the financing doesn't solve the problem at all, in that it doesn't address why there was terrorism in the first place. And we've seen situations where terrorism become even creative and more creative, and even are able to develop strategies when finance has been taken away from them. I think if you really want to stop terrorism, you need to recognize that at its origin there's a conflict. What's that conflict? Find it and resolve it.
Okay. Tewi?
Well, you cannot address terrorism from a strictly financial point of view. It is something that can be addressed from a holistic point of view.
Yes, it's
why do people, first of all, take arms? I think the fundamental issue of terrorism is injustice.
Okay.
When people have a sense of injustice, they take the arms. Secondly, it is also the, I would say, people taking advantage, getting into the guise of terrorism to settle, especially political scores.
Okay,
when you look at the current law, let us talk about what is happening in our country. The current law on terrorism is more of a problem.
Yes, you talked about that earlier. Yes, Yvonne.
Okay, address the root causes of what caused terrorism, and I think we'll be out of that.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The program didn't start well, but we are very happy to notice that it has ended well. We want to thank you for coming. We also want to thank our viewers for being there. We apologize for the wrong start. Watch a rebroadcast of this program on Monday between 2:30 and 3 p.m. Or you, at your convenience, you just connect to CRTV web, Facebook, and you can watch us. Thank you very much. Nice day.
Pour réussir une belle émission de Cameroun Feeling, il vous faut 15 grammes de classe de Eric Christiania, 20 grammes d'énergie positive de Patience, 25 grammes d'invités de choix, 15 grammes de découverte, 35 grammes de bonne humeur. Saupoudrez le tout d'informations culturelles. Cameroun Feeling, de lundi à vendredi, de 8h10 à 10h, on Crtv. The Heart of the Nation.
It's about me, myself, and I. Did I just say that? Here it is, your moment of Zen. Revealing, reminding, living. Let's live life like never before.